More than 400,000 people in China have lost access to their money since the banks began operating. Are out of money and on the verge of bankruptcy. And this is the official number. If we dig in depth, the number is likely higher. When you put your money in the bank, you expect the bank will pay you some interest. Ideally, the bank will lend your money to someone. Accumulate second and higher interest. The interest rate on savings accounts is around 1%, while the credit card rate is around 20%. This difference is the profit after you have been paid that the bank has to make. However, every time you check your bank account, they still says your money is in the bank, and you can withdraw whenever you want. And he is. Because of a system we have called fractional reserve banking. Banks are only allowed keep 10% of your money and lend the rest. So if your bank account shows this, your money is there, it's not real. This is not a problem when there is an economy doing very well. People often do not withdraw all their savings overnight, especially if it's millions of dollars. A bank is where you hide your money, especially considering the minimum interest they pay you, which is usually significantly lower than inflation. But the moment people feel that their money is not safe in the bank, they will run to it. Banks can withdraw their savings, but because of fractional reserve banking, banks won't be able to pay people, causing the bank to go bankrupt. 4,000 banks in China are on the brink of bankruptcy. Even if a part of these banks collapses, the consequences can be disastrous because it can push the economy into a crisis that will lead to the entire economy will collapse. And this is only one side of the problem. On the other hand, is the housing crash that China is facing, which we have discussed in the past video. China's banks could face $350 billion in property crisis losses. S&P Global Ratings. An estimated 2.4 trillion yuan, $356 billion, or 6.4% of mortgages, are at risk, while Deutsche Bank AG is warning that at least 7% of home loans are at risk. There is a property market, the foundation of China's economy, which looks set to explode. Government. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being spent to save it, but this can only reduce the crisis. And don't avoid it. Whether China, by some miracle, saves its real estate market, it's far from over. Will China's economy survive in the future? 6 months is a big ask. Why is China's economy about to crash? And why are investors like Cathie Wood selling their shares and leaving China for good? We'll answer all of these questions and more, but before we do, give this thumbs up the video and let's dive in. Despite China's glorious history, over the past 2 centuries, China has suffered hands of foreign invaders like Europe and Japan. And for the better part of in the 20th century, the country became impoverished to the point where millions of people could not afford it to put food on the table. In just a few years from 1959 to 1961, 15 to 55 million died. A few decades after the Chinese Great Famine, Deng Xiaoping came to power and changed the whole ideology of China. China was isolated. He did not trade with the world and viewed it with great suspicion. But Deng Xiaoping decided to open the country to foreigners and created a special economy. Zones where foreign companies can come in and exploit China's cheap labor. Working better than starving in a factory for 16 hours a day. Companies flooded into China and became economic zones like Shenzhen and Shanghai. Some of the richest cities in the whole world. China's GDP increased in 40 years. From $191 billion to about $15 trillion. It literally became a factory world. It produces everything from cheap clothes, even modern technology like iPhones. Despite tensions between China and the US is its largest trading partner. It exports about half a ton worth supplies goods to the United States, and the European Union is its second largest partner. Although a GDP of $15 trillion looks huge, China's GDP per capita is much lower than yours. Think it's about 10 Kelvin's dollars, which makes it a developing country like Russia or Turkey. If you compare it with advanced economies like Germany, Japan, it still has a long way to go. Or America. One of the main challenges in any development. The country faces a middle-income trap. It is a condition where a nation becomes rich enough, where workers get very rich. Naturally, they will demand higher wages. Higher wages make manufacturing goods more expensive, and suddenly the country will lose its competitive advantage of being a cheap manufacturer, so the corporation that initially those who come to China for cheap labor will pack their bags and go elsewhere, where the cost will come. Labor is still cheap. Just a few days ago, Bloomberg reported this Apple plans to start manufacturing the iPhone 14 in India around 2 months after its release. Outside of China, the company is working with suppliers to expand manufacturing. India, and the first iPhone 14s in the country is likely to be out by the end of October or November. India is where China returned in the 1990s. And it's investing in infrastructure that will allow companies to move easily. Manufacturing in India. Why pay higher wages when you can do it for a fraction in India of the price? Apple is not alone. UBS evidence study. The lab found that a staggering 76% of U.S. companies with factories in China to move operations to other countries in 2020. It includes brands like Nike, Microsoft, Dell, Intel, and more. Tensions between America and the United States. China is growing. If China decided to attack Taiwan, how would the U.S. react? Similar sanctions he has imposed on Russia. How will American companies continue to operate with such restrictions? This is the reason why most of them plan to relocate their plants. Even non-Americans. Companies like Hyundai Motor Group have also taken steps to offload manufacturing from China. The U.S. is investing heavily in ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asia. The nations is a political and economic union of 10 member states in Southeast Asia, which America wants to use it as an alternative for American companies. Following the West's tough sanctions on Russia, where international companies such as McDonald's and Starbucks had to sell its business for cash, not risking staying in any country. In China, although it seems that China is rich enough to survive on its own without the West. Companies, look out, China is making smartphones, electric cars and drones. It can compete with America. Unfortunately, this is not entirely true. While some Chinese companies have seen tremendous as successful as BYD or Huawei, they rely heavily on American companies for their components. Take Huawei. The company was growing so fast that approximately surpassing Samsung and Apple as the world's largest smartphone seller, but some things went wrong in 2019 when the US imposed sanctions on the company. Yet, Huawei's technological strength depends on semiconductors, which is the most important a component in a smartphone. And if you take a look at the companies that dominate it sector, they are all American. Think Nvidia, Intel, Qualcomm, Broadcom, AMD, etc. Other 3 companies that are not US companies, such as TSMC, ASML, or Samsung. America relies heavily on companies like Cadence or Synopsys to design their chips. This is why the company has barely survived the US sanctions. How will China escape the middle-income trap and develop new technologies without becoming dependent? There is a challenge in the West that China will have to overcome in the next decade. Well, whether it will be able to do that once most American companies leave the country is another big question. But that's only part of the problem. Are China's 2 largest trading partners to go into recession? Without Russian gas, investors are so worried that the EU going through some kind of financial crisis and selling their euros to the point where the euro hit an all-time low. Factories will have to shut down without the required energy, which many already did in Germany, leading to increased unemployment and reduced demand. America is going through its own crisis. Since the beginning of the year, the Fed is raising rates, which experts expect will lead to a recession. I mean, America is already in recession. But what does this have to do with China? A financial crisis that reduces demand in its top 2 largest trading partners is a disaster for a country that relies heavily on exports. If that were the only problem, it wouldn't be a big deal, but since China is on the brink of a housing crash and the banks are running, the combination of all these cash-strapped factories is likely to push the economy a serious financial crisis. Thanks for watching, and until next time.